The past few months have shaken us and revealed the fragility of, just about everything. We've seen the fragility of our healthcare system, our food supply chain, the economy, international trade, race relations. It seems that everything in our world is fragile right now. Last year I read a book called Antifragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He's a mathematical statistician and risk analyst. He writes, "Some things benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, disorder, and stressors. They love adventure, risk, and uncertainty. Yet in spite of the ubiquity of this phenomenon, there's no word for the exact opposite of fragile. So let's call it anti-fragile. Anti-fragility is beyond resilience or robustness. The resilient resists shocks and stays the same. The anti-fragile gets better." This idea of anti-fragility is fascinating to me. What Taleb is saying here is that over time, only the anti-fragile survives and thrives. So here's a question for you. Is the church fragile? The church in Canada certainly feels fragile right now. Just last year, experts predicted a third of churches in Canada would close. And now some experts are saying this timeline has been accelerated with the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, many of them are saying some of those churches won't survive the next year or two. So is the church fragile? Well, that depends on how you define the church. Buildings and budgets are fragile. Most relationships in church communities are fragile. Common belief systems can be fragile. Programs and ministries, our sense of connection and community, all of these things are somewhat fragile. There are many elements and expressions of the church that are fragile, and when those elements and expressions become how we define ourselves, what we identify with as a church, then yes, the church is fragile. But the true essence of the church is not fragile. In fact, the essence of the church is the very definition of anti-fragile. Remember, fragile things get worse when they are shocked and rocked. Resilient things stay the same when they're shocked and rocked. But anti-fragile things get better. They grow, they flourish, they get stronger when they are shocked and rocked. And that is exactly what happened to the early church. The early church was faced with persecution and danger, chaos, volatility, and adversity beyond what we could imagine. Christians were literally hunted down and killed. They were stoned, they were crucified, they were burned alive, or fed to the lions. But the church wasn't fragile, nor was it just resilient. It didn't just survive, it flourished. It exploded and grew when it was most exposed to all the things that threatened to harm and destroy it. And this has been repeated often throughout history. Most recently, we see this in China and Ethiopia. At the time of the Chinese Revolution in 1949, there were about 4 million Christians in China. In 1949, a communist regime took over and set up a new government called the People's Republic of China. And they did everything they could to destroy the church. The church had to go underground. No buildings, no Bibles, no public worship gatherings, no official pastors or priests. Christians were threatened with imprisonment. In fact, many Christians were persecuted and killed. There's actually a resurgence of persecution on the Christian church in China today, but that's a topic for another time. The point is the church should have died in China. But it wasn't fragile. And it wasn't just resilient either. It was anti-fragile. It actually grew and flourished with all the danger, hardship, persecution, and risk. It grew from 4 million to over 67 million people today. That's because the essence of the church is anti-fragile. Another example is a Mennonite church called the Mennonite Christos Church in Ethiopia. It grew out of the work of Eastern Mennonite missions in the 1950s. Mennonite missions set up hospitals and schools, eventually starting a church as a result of demand. And growth in the early years was quite slow, until 1974, when a military coup occurred and a military communist regime called the Derg took power. The Derg tried to eradicate certain sects of Christianity, which included the Mennonite Church. At the time, there were 5,000 Mennonite Mesorete Christos members. They went into hiding, just like the church in China, and with the increased persecution, chaos, adversity, and risk, the church exploded. The Mesorete Christos Church grew from 5,000 members in 1974 to over 470,000 in 2014. That's a growth percentage of 9,330% in 40 years. Adversity, hardship, danger, disorder, chaos, risk, these are all good for the church. They force us to get back to the essence of what church is. The essence of the church is anti-fragile. The essence of the church grows and becomes stronger the more difficult and challenging things get. So the important question I have asked, and I ask again for us to reflect on this summer, is this: what is the essence of the church? What makes us, this particular group of people, a local body of Christ? This summer, I've invited some people to share their thoughts on this matter, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them. Also, some of you have requested for us to speak to the issue of racism. What is racism? And some of you have requested that our own Dr. Laura Morlock address this issue. And next Sunday, that is going to be the Avon video on our YouTube channel. So please check in next Sunday and every Sunday this summer, because you're going to hear from some interesting people. And a lot of the thoughts that are going to be shared are going to be on this question: what is the essence of the church? We know it's anti-fragile, but what is it?